At 34,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean, Flight 472 cruised smoothly toward New York. Everything inside the aircraft felt ordinary. The low hum of engines, the quiet conversation of passengers, and the gentle vibration of the fuselage. But in seat 14A, a quiet mystery sat unnoticed among hundreds of strangers. Her name was Alyssa Hartman, a calm young woman in her mid-20s with a composed face and sharp, distant eyes. She appeared like any other traveler, earbuds in, a half-finished cup of coffee beside her, and a travel magazine untouched on the tray table. Yet behind that quiet expression was a past no one on board could have imagined. Alyssa was not an ordinary passenger. She was a former U.S. Air Force pilot, one of the youngest ever to fly an F-22 Raptor. 3 years earlier, she had disappeared during a classified mission, presumed dead. Her name had vanished from every record, her existence erased. Now she was back, not in a cockpit but among civilians, her identity buried under layers of secrecy. As the hours passed, she stared through the small oval window, watching the endless blue horizon. There was something comforting about the quiet distance between the sky and the sea. But deep inside, she could never completely silence the instincts of a fighter pilot. Every small sound, every vibration in the plane, still registered in her mind. Then somewhere over the mid-Atlantic, the stillness changed. The aircraft trembled slightly more than usual. The cabin lights flickered once. To the average traveler, it was just turbulence. But to someone like Alyssa, it felt different. The plane was not shaking from random wind currents. It was reacting to something external, something controlled. The captain's voice came over the speakers, calm but unusually brief, asking passengers to fasten their seatbelts. The announcement ended, but Alyssa could sense tension. The engines changed tone, the sound deepening as if the pilots were adjusting power manually. Years of experience told her this wasn't routine. She glanced at the in-flight display screen in front of her. The plane's location marker had frozen. A moment later, the signal disappeared altogether. No position, no speed, no map. The GPS connection was gone. Alyssa's hand tightened around the armrest. A slow, deliberate breath steadied her. Losing GPS mid-ocean wasn't normal, and neither was the flickering light she suddenly saw outside her window, moving against the wind's direction. Her thoughts raced. The movement wasn't lightning or a reflection. It was controlled, deliberate, and fast, too fast for anything commercial. Up ahead in the cockpit, both pilots were struggling to make sense of the situation. Their communication systems were breaking down, radar screens showing erratic blips that appeared and vanished instantly. The magnetic compass began to spin, and the autopilot disconnected itself. They were flying blind, surrounded by static and invisible interference. In the cabin, anxiety began to spread. Some passengers whispered, others gripped their seats, but Alyssa remained still, analyzing every vibration, every sound. Her pulse was steady, her breathing measured. She was no longer the quiet woman in seat 14A. She was the soldier beneath the disguise, instincts waking after years of silence. Then the clouds outside shifted, dark masses folding in on themselves, like smoke being pulled by unseen hands. Through the fog, shapes began to emerge. They were faint, triangular silhouettes moving in perfect formation, reflecting flashes of light with unnatural precision. Alyssa's memories flooded back. She had seen these shapes before, not in the sky over America, but in the classified airspace above Syria, on the night she disappeared, the night her entire squadron had vanished. She remembered the radar anomalies, the way communication cut out, and how the horizon had twisted like glass under pressure. That was the last thing she had seen before. Her jet spiraled into a blinding flash of white. Now those same patterns danced outside the passenger window. The same impossible speed, the same silence. The aircraft began to lose altitude slightly, engines struggling against invisible resistance. Alyssa braced herself, her eyes fixed on the mysterious lights. The plane wasn't under attack, it was being observed. Something was tracking it, scanning it, testing it. Far above the clouds, U.S. radar systems had already detected the incident. Air defense units scrambled fighter jets, F-22, Raptor streaking across the sky from a nearby base. The call signs of those jets, though unknown to the passengers below, carried a strange echo from Alyssa's past. Somewhere within that formation, a pilot was broadcasting a warning to the unidentified. Object moving near Flight 472. Static. Filled the frequency as the F-22s tried to lock, onto the targets, but nothing appeared on their sensors long enough to identify. Alyssa sensed their presence. The sound of distant thunder wasn't weather. It was jet engines. Her heart pounded. These were her people, her aircraft, chasing the same phenomena that had once erased her from existence. Outside, the strange lights changed direction instantly, moving with precision no human technology could replicate. They seemed to toy with the fighters, allowing brief radar locks before vanishing again into the cloud layers. Inside the cockpit, confusion turned to quiet fear. The pilots could do little but maintain course and hope to keep control of the plane. But for Alyssa, the fear was mixed with recognition. She had witnessed their patterns before: the oscillating movement, the radio blackout, the electromagnetic interference. These were not random encounters. They were part of something larger, something coordinated. The energy around the plane shifted again. For a few seconds, every electronic system on board went dark. The lights, the monitors, the navigation instruments, everything. Total blackout. The cabin fell into darkness, broken only by flashes of lightning outside. When the power returned, the radar systems of the nearby fighters picked up one final. Anomaly 6 unidentified crafts ascending rapidly into the stratosphere, vanishing at impossible speed. The disturbance cleared almost immediately. The storm dissipated, the instruments stabilized, and Flight 472 leveled out as though nothing had happened. But the silence that followed felt heavy, unnatural. Alyssa looked out once more into the night sky, seeing only the stars and the faint glow of the moon. Whatever had been there was gone, but it had left a trace, a whisper in the static. Somewhere within the faint radio noise that returned, she could hear something indistinct, a single word distorted by interference. It was a voice from the frequencies she once used in combat, a voice that seemed to call her name. For the rest of the flight, she sat motionless, staring out into the darkness. Her mind was caught between two worlds, the quiet anonymity she had built on Earth and the haunting memory of something that existed beyond it. The passengers around her slowly calmed, unaware of what they had just passed through. The pilot said nothing over the intercom. The flight attendants continued their duties, pretending nothing unusual had happened. But Alyssa knew the truth. This was no ordinary storm, no random glitch in technology. The encounter that night confirmed what she had always suspected, that her disappearance years ago was not a coincidence. The same force that had pulled her out of the sky once before had returned, not to destroy her but to remind her. As the aircraft crossed into American airspace, she finally closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she felt both fear and clarity. Somewhere out there, above the clouds and beyond human understanding, someone or something had recognized her again. The world would never know what really happened on Flight 22. To the passengers, it would remain just another long journey across the ocean. But for the quiet girl in seat 14A, it was the beginning of something far greater. The moment when the sky whispered her forgotten name once more. And this time it wasn't through human lips. The storm outside the aircraft was growing stronger. Dark clouds pressed against the fuselage, lightning flashing across the windows like silent explosions in the night. Inside, the passengers were uneasy, their whispers drowned out by the heavy hum of the engines fighting through the turbulence. But amidst the tension, one person remained perfectly still, the quiet girl in seat 14A. She hadn't moved much since the flight began, except to glance occasionally out the window, where streaks of white light seemed to dance between the clouds. Her calmness was unnerving. Even the flight attendants noticed her silence, the way she seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. As the plane passed over the North Atlantic, something unusual happened. The aircraft's communication systems began to flicker. Radios cut out. Screens went dark. The captain's voice tried to break through the static, but his words were lost in distortion. At first, passengers assumed it was the storm. But in the cockpit, the pilots could see something more alarming, an unidentified radar signal moving just beneath them, following the plane's path with precision. Miles away, two F-22 Raptors on a routine patrol received the distress signal. Their radar picked up the same unknown signature, a fast-moving object, flying low beneath the commercial flight. The pilots were ordered to intercept. Back on board the passenger jet, the cabin lights dimmed suddenly. The captain's voice came through again, faint but clear this time. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're experiencing some technical issues." The passengers obeyed. Most clutched their armrests, praying the storm would pass. But 14A didn't move. She looked out the window again, her eyes following the faint, glowing lights that now seemed closer than ever. They weren't lightning. They were controlled, deliberate, alive. The first F-22 closed in fast, breaking through the clouds. Its pilot, Callahan, scanned the horizon. There, below the storm, something shimmered. Not metallic, not mechanical, but radiant, like a sphere of light. His instruments couldn't lock onto it. It was as if it wasn't there at all. Then the radio crackled. Eagle 1 visual confirmation? Callahan hesitated. I don't know what I'm seeing. Inside the commercial jet, several passengers gasped as a beam of light suddenly swept across the side of the aircraft. It wasn't from lightning. It moved with purpose, scanning. The girl in 14A raised her head, her face calm yet resolute, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. The turbulence grew worse. Oxygen masks dropped. The lights flickered, alarms blaring in the cockpit. The pilot struggled for control, but then, in the chaos, a strange thing happened. The radar reappeared, this time showing something impossible. The unknown signal wasn't following the plane anymore, it was beneath it. And it was rising. The F-22s closed in, ready to engage. But their systems began to malfunction too. Targeting computers froze. The pilots could only watch as the glowing sphere ascended into the clouds. Then, without warning, it vanished. The radar went blank. Silence filled the skies. On board the passenger plane, everything stabilized. The lights returned. The engines leveled out. People cheered, relieved that the turbulence was over. But the pilots in the cockpit sat frozen. Because amid all the restored systems, one new transmission had appeared on their console. A faint voice, repeating over and over. Delta Flight 209, maintain altitude. She is awake. The voice wasn't theirs. It wasn't from air traffic control. And it wasn't on any known frequency. In seat 14A, the girl finally blinked and reached down to her wrist, where a thin metal band emitted a faint blue light. The storm outside cleared almost instantly, the clouds parting to reveal a calm, moonlit sky. The captain's relief was short-lived because, when he checked his instruments again, he realized something horrifying. Their flight path had shifted. They weren't over the Atlantic anymore. The coordinates showed them somewhere else, somewhere hundreds of miles off course. And no one on board had felt a thing. The F-22s, still searching through the clouds, found nothing but static. The mysterious object had vanished from all sensors. And yet, one of the pilots noticed something strange on his radar, a ghost signature, flickering in and out, matching the same frequency as the commercial jet. It wasn't just interference. It was following the plane again. As the passengers began to relax, a quiet hum filled the cabin, almost melodic. The girl in 14A closed her eyes. For the first time, a faint symbol glowed beneath her wristband, a pattern of concentric circles, pulsing like a heartbeat. Outside, the night sky shimmered once more. The radar in the cockpit flickered, with one final message before going. Completely dark again. It begins. The captain froze. He had heard that phrase before, during training years ago in a file marked classified, a phrase connected to an event that had never been publicly acknowledged. Operation Silent Wave. In that moment, seat 14A was empty. The girl was gone. Only the faint sound of the engines filled the silence, and the distant echo of thunder fading into the calm night sky. Far below, the ocean reflected the stars, but among them one light moved differently, slowly, silently, watching, and somewhere, deep within the radio static of the F-22's communication channel, a voice whispered once more, "She's not one of them." The sky above the Atlantic had turned clear again, but the silence that followed was unnerving. The passengers aboard Flight 209 were calm now, unaware that their flight had been shifted off course by hundreds of miles. The moonlight washed through the cabin windows, giving everything an almost dreamlike stillness. Yet beneath that stillness, the air itself seemed to vibrate, subtly, rhythmically, like a sound too low for human ears to detect. Inside the cockpit, the captain stared at the coordinates flashing on his display. They made no sense. They were no longer flying above the Atlantic Ocean. The readings placed them over an uncharted region somewhere, beyond any recognized flight path. Fuel readings were normal, yet their distance from any known landmass was impossible. He tried to contact air traffic control again, but the radio emitted only static, layered with faint whispers, words just beyond comprehension. The first officer tried a backup channel, but the result was the same. Behind them, the cabin lights dimmed again for just a moment. At that same instant, deep in the shadows of the rear cabin, something flickered across the metal, like a reflection, but there was no source. A ripple of light, barely visible, moved across the wall, spreading like a wave. The flight attendants walked quietly through the aisle, checking on passengers. Every seat was filled except one, 14A. Where the girl had been sitting, only her small metal wristband remained, pulsing faintly with blue light. Unseen by the passengers, that light began to spread. The pulse moved through the metallic frame of the seat, along the cabin walls, across the plane's surface, tiny, invisible vibrations of energy traveling through the metal. The girl may have vanished, but something of her remained. Far above the clouds, the two F-22 pilots were still circling. Their radars were erratic, normal 1 second, blank the next. Then suddenly their instruments spiked with readings that made no sense. A signal emanating not from the unknown sphere anymore, but from the passenger plane itself. The voice returned, distorted but unmistakable. Delta Flight 209. Hold your course. The threshold is near. Neither pilot could respond. The message didn't originate from any control tower. It was as if the plane was transmitting to itself. Down below, inside the cabin, a faint tremor shook the seats. Several passengers looked around nervously. One child began to cry softly. And then, something outside caught their eyes. The clouds parted to reveal a vast, shimmering curtain of light stretching across the horizon, like the northern lights but alive. It pulsed in slow waves of color, forming shapes that looked almost geometric. It wasn't nature. It was designed. As the plane drew closer, every compass reading began to spin. GPS systems crashed. Even the digital clocks on the passengers' phones froze at 03:33. In that frozen moment, a low hum filled the air. It wasn't coming from the engines. It came from everywhere, every surface, every object, every heartbeat. The frequency rose higher until it was almost unbearable. And then silence. The world outside the windows changed. The Atlantic was gone. The clouds were gone. Below the plane stretched a vast, dark landscape illuminated by scattered lights that moved like rivers of fire. Enormous structures rose from the shadows, ancient yet advanced, glowing faintly with energy. Towers, bridges, circular platforms rotating slowly in the mist. It looked like a city beneath the clouds hidden from the modern world. Inside the cockpit, the captain's hands trembled. The altimeter showed they were still at 32,000 feet. But the readings couldn't be right. The view outside suggested they were descending slowly, without touching the controls. Then came another transmission, this time faint and almost human. She opened the gate. You're inside the frequency now. The captain stared at the co-pilot. Neither spoke. They couldn't. The words vibrated, inside their heads like thoughts that weren't their own. In the passenger cabin, people began to notice something new. The seatback screens flickered back on. But instead of safety messages or flight maps, every screen showed the same thing. A circle of light rotating in the center, surrounded by strange symbols. The same pattern glowed on the wristband left behind in seat 14A. Then for just a second, the image on the screens changed to a face. Not the girl's, but something that resembled her, older. Calm, eyes glowing faintly blue. Her lips moved as if speaking, but there was no sound. Then the image vanished, replaced once more by static. The lights flickered again. When they came back on, several passengers swore the person next to them looked different. A subtle shift, like a reflection slightly out of sync with reality. The captain tried to regain control, pulling on the yoke, but it didn't respond. The plane was moving on its own, drawn toward the luminous horizon. Below them, the glowing structures pulsed faster, forming a pattern that mirrored the symbol on the screens. Then in the far distance, something massive began to rise, a circular platform lifting slowly through the mist, supported by pillars of light. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the plane as it approached. The frequency pulsed again, one long tone that made every passenger wince in pain. And just like that, everything went dark. When the lights came back, they were flying through clear sky again. The radar showed no anomalies. The instruments were normal. The Atlantic was below them once more, calm and endless. The passengers cheered, thinking the worst was over. The captain smiled weakly, still shaken. Everything seemed fine, until he noticed that the clock hadn't moved. It still read 0333, and outside, through the window of seat 14A, a faint glow still pulsed in the clouds. 3 concentric circles fading slowly into the night. The storm was gone, but something had crossed through, and this time, it wasn't leaving. The clock had stopped at 0333, but time itself hadn't. Or maybe it had. High above the Pacific, the airliner floated in a space that wasn't sky anymore. The clouds around it shimmered, bending light like glass. Everything outside, the windows, was a slow-moving storm of color, fragments of violet and blue suspended like liquid. Inside, the passenger sat frozen in silence, eyes open but unmoving. Only one figure walked the aisle, the girl from seat 14A. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpet. The lights flickered when she passed, as if the plane itself recognized her presence. She stopped near the cockpit door, placed her hand against the cold metal, and whispered something, not in words but in sound. The vibration rippled through the fuselage like a hum, deep and ancient. The pilots, trapped in their half-awareness, heard it in their headsets, not through sound waves but through the mind. It was her call sign, the same signal that the F-22 pilots had reported days ago, the same one that the radar operators said didn't exist. The hum became stronger. The stars outside started to shift, forming lines, geometry that no astronomer could explain. The girl closed her eyes and for the first time smiled faintly. The hum became a pulse. The pulse became a rhythm. And then the world turned inside out. When Captain Rhodes opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the ocean, calm, endless, stretching under the morning sun. The sky was clear. The instruments flickered to life one by one, as if nothing had happened. But when he looked to his right seat and the co-pilot was gone, and when he looked back into the cabin, every seat was filled, every passenger alive, except seat 14A. It was empty. The wristband that had once glowed faintly was now completely dark. No trace of energy, no sign of interference, no explanation at all, just silence. The flight attendant approached quietly, whispering, "Sir." She was here. Captain Rhodes didn't respond. He just stared out the window, where faint ripples of blue still shimmered against the horizon, vanishing slowly into daylight. Hours later, at an undisclosed military base, the black box recording was played. There was no sound of panic, no mechanical failure, just one continuous signal, a deep low-frequency hum that appeared only once. At 0333, and at the end of that hum, a voice, soft, calm, and unmistakably human. It said, "Control restored. Transmission complete." The analyst froze the tape. The voice was not in any known language, but its tone was almost comforting. The waveform of that sound wasn't random either. When visualized, it formed a spiral, identical to the one found in ancient carvings discovered beneath the Arctic ice, a pattern that scientists once believed was thousands of years old. Coincidence? The officials didn't think so. Meanwhile, across the world, strange phenomena began to surface. In Chile, radio telescopes picked up rhythmic pulses from deep space, repeating at exact 3-minute, 33-second intervals. In Cairo, archaeologists excavating a buried temple found metallic fragments engraved with flight, codes that matched the plane's number. And in Nevada, 2 F-22 pilots, the same who had once heard the mysterious call sign, were debriefed again. They described a vision in their cockpit displays, a glowing female figure surrounded by concentric circles of light, motionless in the clouds. The Pentagon sealed the footage within hours, but the story didn't end there. Weeks later, a passenger named Jacob, one of those who had been aboard Flight 717, received a message on his phone. It was a photo taken from the airplane window, timestamped at 0333. He hadn't taken it. In the picture, the sky looked ordinary, except for one detail. A faint silhouette of a woman standing outside the plane, on the wing, her hair flowing like smoke, eyes glowing white watching the horizon. The metadata of the photo showed something impossible. The location wasn't Earth. It read, "Coordinates unavailable, atmospheric layer unknown." Jacob never showed the image to anyone again. The phone disappeared days later, and he stopped talking about the flight. Investigators labeled the event an electrical anomaly, combined with psychological distress. But among those who studied the case privately, scientists, code breakers, and a handful of classified analysts, another theory emerged, They believed the girl in Seat 14A wasn't human in the ordinary sense. She was an interpreter, a conduit between two realms of consciousness, the human, and something far beyond. The call sign was not a distress signal. It was a frequency alignment, a way to synchronize two layers of existence. The hum at 0333 was the point of contact, where reality thinned, and the illusion of linear time broke down. Flight 707 hadn't crashed. It had shifted. Somewhere, above or beneath our perception, the hum still echoes. Airline radios occasionally pick it up, a faint pulse, always at 3:33 a.m. Sometimes pilots report seeing a flicker of light in the clouds, or a shadow standing on the wing for just a second before disappearing. And if you listen closely within that hum, you might still hear it. A whisper, soft, familiar. Seat 14A, confirmed. The transmission continues.